Welcome to the Thought to Action podcast presented by the London Center for Policy Research, where we delve deeply into important issues, examine ideas, discuss solutions, and put forth thoughts to action. I'm Lieutenant Colonel retired Tony Shaffer, the president of the London Center. If you like our content and would like more, please join our Patreon community at Patreon Thought to Action. Patreons get to preview all of our Thought to Action work. And also we have exclusive Q&A, Thought to Action Q&A, that we'd like you all to participate in. Also subscribe to Thought to Action YouTube channel, our YouTube channel, which we'd greatly appreciate, and follow us on the other social network systems as long as they're there, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course, londoncenter.org. So I am honored and grateful to be joined by one of our most effective senior fellows, Gordon Chang. Gordon Chang has been an extraordinary voice in the wilderness, warning us for years of the issues of China. And Gordon has been in the forefront of recently just trying to identify those areas which are not political, but are necessary to understanding the scope, the depth, and the aggressiveness of the Chinese government, the Chinese People's Republic government, basically has shown itself to be to the Western world. So, Gordon, thank you for joining me today. Welcome to Thought to Action.
Well, thank you so much, Tony.
So let's get right into it. There's been some real issues lately regarding what a Biden administration is going to do or not do regarding China. So first, let me just ask you flat out, how well do you believe the foreign policy of the Trump administration has been? How effective has it been to essentially both identifying the threats that China has presented, and how effective have they been to essentially work to counter those to date?
I think the best way to answer that question is to point out that Beijing throughout all last year was working to make sure that President Trump was not reelected,
yes,
which shows you that China very much believed that Trump's actions were effective. So the best thing to do is look at what your enemy says and does.
That's a great answer. So with that said, we've seen great pushback by our own Wall Street on some of this by the fact that I know from my own direct operational experience, there's no company in China, there's no entity in China that is not somehow affiliated or controlled by the central government. They're communists. And I know that this is a hard pill for some to swallow. Why is it that we have such resistance by our own side to recognizing what is going on?
There are a lot of reasons for that. One of them is that after the end of the Cold War, we Americans believed that history had ended, as Francis Fukuyama, the political scientist, said, and as Henry Kissinger said. And I don't like quoting Henry Kissinger because I disagree with most of what he says. But he did say one thing was really quite incisive. And he said, look, you can't take a holiday from history. And indeed, that's what we did. We believed that we could engage China, and by that work with China so that as it became stronger, it would become benign. But as we have seen, as we worked with China, as we supported the Communist Party, it became more aggressive, hostile, and belligerent. So that's part of the reason. The other is that China has worked very hard to penetrate all levels of American society with cash or other means. And you mentioned Wall Street in your question.
Right.
Di Dongsheng, who was a professor at Renmin University, in those remarks that he made at the end of November, he actually talked about how Beijing had used Wall Street to influence outcomes at the top of the American political system. And China did that by shoveling a lot of cash to Wall Street. So I think the monetary or the financial aspects of this can't be overlooked, that China has flooded the US with money.
So with that point, as one of the things we'll cover in our next Thought to Action that we'll do for as exclusive content, my understanding, Gordon, from the intelligence officers and professionals I respect, Beijing spent upwards of $40 billion on investing in the variety, the full spectrum of cultural access they have to essentially make sure that President Trump was defeated. Would you agree or disagree that that's a reasonable figure to think that they spent on this?
Yeah, I think that they spent a lot of money. I don't know how much, but a lot of what they did, and really the most important aspects is not the money, but some of the very simple things they accomplished. So, for instance, Radio Free Asia reports that an intelligence unit of the People's Liberation Army actually based themselves in the now closed Houston consulate. And from there, they used big data and artificial intelligence to identify Americans likely to participate in Black Lives Matter and Antifa protests.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sent them videos through TikTok on how to riot.
Yeah.
That didn't cost that much money, but clearly it had an effect. So whether it was 40 billion or 4 billion or 400 billion, what they were doing was malicious and indeed was effective, because ultimately President Trump was not reelected.
Right. So to that point, this is a sticky question, but I think it's one we need to look at as a policy think tank. Do you believe that the Chinese actions as it relates to the influence, and we're talking about the full spectrum as China looks at through their eyes, they are at war with us, and therefore anything is fair game. Should we then examine their actions from that same lens? Should we examine how they did clearly work to upend our political system from the perspective that the U.S. government should do something to hold them accountable for this clear use of their tools as a psychological operation to upend our election?
Well, absolutely. What we need to do is, first of all, recognize that China declared a people's war on the United States in May 2019. People's Daily, which is the most authoritative publication in China, carried a piece which actually talked about warfare, people's war. And then, of course, China's military has this doctrine of unrestricted warfare,
Right.
and that's exactly what's been occurring. So we Americans think we're a society of peace, but I don't believe that we are, and we need to respond effectively. And we have not been defending ourselves really with the rigor that is absolutely necessary in this particular circumstance.
So I've spoken with the last two chairmen of the Joint Chief, General Joseph Dunford, Joe Dunford, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs prior to the current administration. As a matter of fact, he was selected by President Obama to be the chairman. And I've also spoken with Mark Milley, the current chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Both those officers have recognized, and their public statements reflect it, that they have a clear understanding of the existential threat that China has offered to the United States. Why is it that the bulk of our government does not listen to you, to me, and to these very senior nonpartisan officers who have said this is an issue?
Well, that's a great question, and historians will ponder that one. But I think that it's very hard for people in democracies to understand the maliciousness and indeed the evil of communist systems. So just to take one example, the spread of the coronavirus beyond China's borders.
Right.
Xi Jinping, the Chinese ruler, deliberately took steps to make sure that this disease infected the world.
Yeah.
He, for at least 5 weeks and maybe longer, lied about the contagiousness. He said it wasn't contagious when they fully knew that it was. And then he pressured countries to impose travel restrictions and quarantines on arrivals from China while he was locking down his own country.
Right.
So he thought that locking down was effective. That means he must have thought that leaning on these other countries would spread the disease. You put those two things together, and there's only one conclusion that fits the facts. And this was a mass murderous event.
No doubt. And I'm with you, Gordon. I don't understand how we're not seeing this for what it really is. And I think it speaks to the effectiveness of their propaganda machine. And let me hit that real quick, because I know we're going to have to wrap it up here. The Chinese have invested a great deal of influence and resources to essentially creating control of the global narrative. For example, right now, I think from credible sources, there's this round 2 of coronavirus in China. About 22 million of their people are locked down. You don't read about this. You don't read about their Sinovac COVID vaccine, which essentially is 50% successful, far below the Western analogs. and how they're trying to influence the use of that, which I would say is almost a danger to the Far East, because that's where they're trying to get this done. And also, this links to their environmental issues. When the incoming Biden administration talks about the Paris Accords and reference China as someone who signed up to it, that's a complete sham. Anything the Chinese say, you cannot trust. And if you trust it, you're a fool or worse. How do you explain the entire world at this point buying into this clear the lies the Chinese government continues to foster on the world?
Well, I guess it's because we believe what we want to believe. We want to believe that we live in a peaceful world. We want to believe that China wants to cooperate with us. We want to believe all these things. And yet, it's, as you say, we need to look at the reality of the situation.
So, last question, and we'll wrap it up. When you examine the people coming into the Biden administration, and by the way, this will lead to our exclusive content. When you look at the people coming into the Biden administration, what do you make of the likely direction of a Joe Biden national security policy towards China?
Well, they come in with the old notions of it would be important to engage China. And John Kerry, for instance, the new climate czar, believes that climate issues are so catastrophic that they override national security issues. I think that the whole team is going to be mugged by reality fairly soon. But this is the whole notion that we should be working with China because we have no alternative not to. That argument sounds reasonable, but when you start to look at it, it doesn't work, because it's the arguments that we've been using for 5 decades,
Right.
And it hasn't worked then.
Well, I'm with you. And by the way, I've got an environmental studies degree, and yes, I can speak with great confidence that the real scientific indicators do not require us to act stupidly over our own national security interests. There's no the world to basically push back against Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. The world is not ending in 8 years. Just saying. I mean, you heard it here first. The world is not ending. So Gordon, thank you for joining us today for Thought to Action. We'll continue this discussion on our other video. And thank you for watching and listening to Thought to Action. If you like this program and would like to help us create more content, please join our Patreon community at Patreon Thought to Action, where you can preview Thought to Action and participate in our Q&A sessions regarding that private community. Also, subscribe to our Thought to Action YouTube channel. Hit the red bell for liking. Please comment. Please also follow us on social media on Thought to Action Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and of course through londoncenter.org. I'm Lieutenant Colonel Tony Shaffer, the President of the Center, and I thank you for being with us today.